right. So for those of you who just joined us and everybody else who joined us earlier, thank you so much. It's very exciting to have you all with us today. So I'm going to start it off with just a quick question that probably everybody such as myself have on their minds nowadays. What does all this AI momentum actually mean for me and the way I work and what I do in finance? So okay, let's be honest, there's not enough noise on this subject nowadays with all these new tools, the bold claims, and all the constant updates emerging, but not always clear answers on what really matters for financial analysts, decision makers, and someone building a career in finance. That's exactly the purpose of this webinar today. So it's about cutting through that noise and focusing on, let's call it the so what actually is changing in the investment workflows, where is AI truly improving outcomes, and where is it maybe even overrated, sort of say. And most importantly, how do I, as a finance professional, stay effective and relevant amongst all this evolution, if you may say. So before we dive into that, I want to just direct your attention to a poll that you will have on your screens that I'm going to be launching. If you cannot see it immediately, you will be able to find it at any point in your bar under polls, or if you click on more, you will find it. It's just a quick 6 questions to understand your backgrounds, your knowledge in AI or experience in AI, and how you plan to take that forward. It will help us keep the conversation and the Q&As more relevant to you guys. So coming back to the topic, what we aim for you to be walking away with after today is for a little bit of practical clarity on the use of AI in finance. So by the end of this, we aim for you to have a clearer sense of where AI can support you in your daily functions and day-to-day work, and where human judgment will remain relevant and will always matter in the investment process, and how you can actually evolve your current function and role when all this AI functionality and tools are embedded within teams and organizations. We'll also touch a little bit on some of the risks, especially the bias in large language models, and why having a basic understanding of how all these work helps you make smarter and, if you want, more confident decisions on your daily functions. So whether you're already using AI tools or maybe just trying to figure it out, such as myself, this is exactly what we're aiming to help you achieve today. Now, to guide us through all of this, we have 2 colleagues, very dear colleagues of us from our partners, the CFA Institute. I'm gonna introduce first. They both will have a chance to introduce themselves to you, but first I have the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Rob Langrick. Rob is the Chief Advocate at the CFA Institute, Chief Product Advocate at the CFA Institute. He spent years shaping the CFA program, including leading it as a general manager, overseeing curriculum development globally. And before that, he built Bloomberg's certification program from the ground up, which now has over 1 million global users. So he brings a very unique perspective on how finance education and skills are evolving. Also with us is Brian Pisaneschi. Brian is a senior investment data scientist at CFA Institute as well, working directly at the intersection of AI and investment analysis. His work focuses on how tools like NLP and generative AI are changing analyst workflows, and he's actively building in this space. So you'll get a very practical, forward-looking perspective from him as well. So before we jump in, I'd just like to point your attention again to the poll, which will continuously be open for you to feel free to answer it whenever you're ready or feel comfortable doing so. So with that, I'm going to be kicking it off with you, Brian. So to start with you, maybe perhaps set the stage to our attendees. When you look at how AI is evolving across finance, where do you believe the gap is at its widest between AI and finance professionals today?
Yes. Well, thanks, Charles, and thanks for having us. Um, so I think that I would say that the biggest gap is the fact that the people in AI they have that engineering background. They know how to use the tools. that right now is at that bleeding edge that if you know how to say create what's called a custom MCP server, a model context protocol, which is essentially this interface to large language models and traditional data. If you know how to do that, plus you know how to build some of the things we're going to talk about today, creating skills within Claude, like there's so much opportunity for you to build more things into your workflow. And it's just that the AI people have more of that advantage right now just because they're more fluent within that more technical background. So while you that have that finance domain expertise, you also have a big advantage over them from applying the nuance, that finance flavor that is not really readily, available in their knowledge to the AI professional. Um, it's that intersection between the two, and we'll get into that at the end here of my presentation. So let me
Amazing.
just share
Amazing.
my
Thank you, Brian. I'm just gonna leave it to you. You lead the way, please. Thank you.
great. Okay, can you see my screen? My slides.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the AI trends before we get in to the discussion with Rob about the CFA program. But yeah, really just want to set the stage, figure out where we are currently within the space, and how relevant how the finance domain relevance is still remaining essential to your career in asset management going forward. All right. But one of the things that I want to bring up, which is essentially, I think, some confusion within our finance space, which is this difference between an agent and an agentic workflow. So you're all very much familiar with the agent because this is what's on things like OpenAI, ChatGPT. This is what's on Claude. Ultimately, the agent is one that has a reasoning engine. You give it a task, it comes up with a plan on how to achieve that task. It sees what tools it has access to, sees what data it has access to, and it goes out and it comes up with the first part of that plan and it executes, maybe pulls in some data, it observes that data, and then it reevaluates, comes up with a new plan for the next step. And then it does this cycle known as the react cycle, the reasoning and action cycle over and over and over again until it's deemed that it's successful and it's done its task, created an output. Now, that is what we're all used to, but that is not necessarily what is the most relevant and valuable for an industry where we need auditability, we need controllability, and we need explainability within the outputs. So that's where you get into the workflow. So the workflow is a predefined step-by-step process that requires some engineering skills to be able to put all of the pieces together. But of course, it also requires that domain expertise to be able to define what each step is for that workflow to be successful. So if this was, say, an equity research analyst workflow, maybe that first step would be to come up with a ton of different search queries to do research for the company, or maybe it's coming up with um, custom questions to ask about the data, which it'll go into step two, and it'll either go out to the web, it'll execute those search queries, or it'll go out to maybe an internal database that pulls in prior analyses that you've already done, or it goes to financial data and it pulls in that data. Whatever it is a predefined task that we can define and create evaluations. We can run tests. We can red team each one of these steps so we can get more comfortable and gain our trust through this kind of scalability of evaluations. And maybe that third step is taking all that information, maybe some of the data, and it's running the functions to manipulate that data. And then step four, it goes and it takes all of its information, it synthesizes it into its report. Again, each one step by step, evaluated, scaled, red teamed, and that's where we have to try to get to these more production ready systems, these systems that can deal with more high risk tasks. That isn't necessarily where we've been so far. Again, because there's a gap in the talent that exists out there to be able to put together these workflows. And so what we've been doing is essentially been creating these agents, and we've been building out our prompts, and I'll get into that in a second, to get better and better and trust it as we've seen its output. So it's this iterative trust. Now, what does this potentially have an issue? Well, if you have an agentic system that goes through this React cycle, um, each one of those steps in the workflow, it's coming up with as it's going through, and it is unauditable. Well, it is less auditable than that workflow. And we all know that LLMs have bias. So that bias could essentially be amplified, especially if it's going through this cycle. There is a lot of evidence of how LLMs are biased. Of course, they come mainly are trained off of the English internet. So there's all sorts of bias that comes from that on a regional basis. There's positional bias. We did some research at CFA Institute that basically asked a large language model to create a buy and sell decision based off of financial metrics of a stock, and just based off of where we put profit margin in the mix. So, we might have had total asset turnover in the middle and profit margin at the beginning versus the end, and it completely changed its buy and sell recommendations. So these models are obviously biased, and what happens inside if we do not detect that bias, we could be unintentionally adding certain behaviors to our output without us really even knowing about it. So this is obviously a big area that is still basically untapped within our field, and we need to all do a much better job coming together and evaluating these systems for this type of bias before we go. There's also framing effect bias that we've done some research on, thinking about how we have our own unconscious bias where a 10% probability of a gain hits differently than a 90% probability of a loss. These are all very much baked into large language models as well, because of course they reflect our behavior. So we need to be very well aware of these things. One of the biggest things, and I want to hesitate to say it's revolutionary because it's not revolutionary, but it's so simple that it's changing how everything is being done within the AI sphere. So that is skills. And the skills are essentially just master prompts. This is where, we context is king. What you put in front of the large language model, what you put into the prompt window of a large language model can dramatically change its output. And if we can build this context to an ultimate degree of detail, we can do some incredible things. So this is a framework, the skills framework that was created by Anthropic, but it has now been adopted by OpenAI. Again, all it is essentially just a master prompt, but inside you might have a skill.md file, markdown file, which is just a markdown file, is just semi-structured text, and it'll look something like this. This is an example of a deep research agent that I created that can do a deep research on the adoption of innovative, sustainable technology, a use case that I thought was valuable from the standpoint of applying these tools to things that we couldn't necessarily do before. Adoption of innovative, sustainable technology isn't something that was so easily captured in traditional ESG scores. So we can now create our own, frameworks for how we do research. And in this case, that's what I've done. But all it is here in this skill.md file, we have this front matter. This front matter is essentially uh, a very brief description of what that skill is, and that's what is shown with all of the skills in Claude. So if you have a portfolio of skills, it's just going to show that. So whenever you might say, I want to run a sustainable deep research report, it will use this front matter to determine whether or not to call this skill. So once it calls this skill, that'll bring up this markdown file. It'll explain in the body when to use the connectors, the workflow, so what's each step, how it's supposed to output it, and then the gotchas. The gotchas are essentially the most important part in my mind because every time you run a prompt, the large language model will have a baseline execution of that prompt. But what the gotchas does is every time you see an error, and this is how we're doing it. We're building trust by just using these files. We're getting a result, and then we say, oh, that's not right. So let's add a gotcha to say, you did it wrong this way. Don't do that again, or do it like this next time. And you just keep building out these gotchas to ultimately fix what the large language model was doing before, and you just keep essentially refining it where it's not training it. You're just adding more context to the large language model, but that increases the probability that the output is going to be more likely correct. If there are other things you can pull that you want it to do, so it can potentially pull in Python scripts. It can pull in references, so assets. This could be Excel files that it can put input data into. If you had a say evaluation model, it could put data into that. It could put in PDFs or photos for like brands and things like that. Sorry, that's the assets. So references was actually deeper dives to what you might be describing in the file. So if you had a more detailed execution of the workflow for, say, this one step, then it'll pull in this context to do a deeper dive, and that will increase the capability of the skill. Ultimately, just to say that this is quite simple. It's nothing more than just a master prompt, but when you can add things like connectors, which are these MCP servers that I mentioned earlier, and you can create custom MCP servers. So that MCP server is, again, it's just a way for a large language model to be able to interact and interface with traditional APIs and traditional data. You can really, the world is your oyster. You can create incredible things. But these systems are all still very much, stochastic and still non-deterministic in the sense that they are not going to produce the same thing every single time, and that reduces its controllability and its auditability. So essentially, where we are now is we've been using these platforms, we've been using ChatGPT, Anthropic, and Claude to scale up our research, speed up our research. We've already gained with that. We've been kind of treating it as a capable employee where we give it a task and it produces an output, and it's either good or bad. So we build some trust over time on how well it's performing. Of course, this requires the human in the loop to be there at all times. So you again you build trust over time in a slow type fashion so that you can potentially give it more increasingly harder and harder tasks. But full autonomy is still a ways off when you are dealing with very high risk type of error tasks. So if you have, in finance, we have very high risk tasks, and we can't just, delegate an AI to do those things unless we've done the evaluations, unless we have a predefined workflow that we've red teamed and we know that each node in the workflow has an accuracy of say 99%, and even at that, depending on how risky of the error is, we still might not fully automate that. So ultimately, we need to get to that point. We need to get to production ready systems, and it's still very much in the infant stage of building that because there is a bottleneck in tech in the talent that has this interdisciplinary skill that has that finance domain expertise, but also has that ability to run these evaluations, understands responsible AI, understands bias. How do we check for bias? How do we, create questions and data sets to be able to uncover that bias? All of these types of things are very technical, and they are still very much a gap in the market. So, with that, I think I've set Rob up a little bit with how ultimately that finance domain expertise is still very much important, and that multidisciplinary approach is still very much important. Um, so I'm going to hand it over to Rob, and he can dive in more to the CFA program and
Cool.
its elements.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Brian. That was a very, very interesting deep dive there. I learned a lot from it, as I do every time I speak with you about AI. So thanks for educating me as well as all our delegates here with Morgan International. So what I'll do, I'll step back a little bit and actually talk about use cases at a bit of a higher level. But a bit about me, I'm kind of a world traveler. And so I talk to a lot of people, stakeholders in the CFA Institute community. And with that, I hear a lot of things. And AI has certainly been the most talked about topic in the last 2 years when I've been on the road, doing about 24 trips a year. So let me just share some things I've learned on the road that I think you may find interesting and very relevant to what Brian just spelled out. So first of all, I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to bring up my my PowerPoint. Brian, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Rob.
Perfect. Okay, so let's dig in here then and talk about the high level what I'm hearing in the field. So a bit about me first of all. I was an equity research analyst back many moons ago, starting over 20 years ago in London, and then I worked in private equity in New York, and following that, Bloomberg, doing in the data business, a bit education and CFA Institute for the past 8 years. So let's talk about, I'm going to key in on that equity research experience. So I do have experience being a sell-side equity research analyst. And so some of these workflows we'll talk about mean a fair amount to me. Okay, so the first big thing to recognize, Brian did show some tools being used there. One really key thing to recognize is there is a platform shift underway. So historically, I worked at Bloomberg for many years, as I just said, and I'm at a FactSet conference today, actually. So the data vendors are a very big part of the furniture on Wall Street or in finance globally. But right now, there's a whole new breed of technology tools that have come out with the frontier model, the frontier models. And so essentially, that's a platform shift happening. So while you have for structured data, you do go to places like the Bloomberg terminal shown on the screen on the left there. But a brand new way of working for Wall Street professionals is on the new tools like Claude that Brian just mentioned a bit earlier, where you use natural language in order to get your job done. And actually, this can be a dramatic efficiency for professionals. I don't think these tools are going to completely replace the structured data solutions on Wall Street today. I do think they're a supplement, but in some instances, they may be some replacement that happens there, given the efficiency of being able to, or the acceleration of your workflow, of being able to ask natural language questions to get very quick answers back. So the platform shift is underway. So this is all the new frontier models that really started coming out in late 2022, ChatGPT, but many more beyond that. So Perplexity has a solution for financial services, for instance. Claude has their own financial services special solution. They actually have a big announcement today in New York City with Dario, the CEO, talking with Jamie Dimon about 10 new tools that hit the news wires in the last half hour. So things are developing very fast right now in terms of these frontier models, the actual front ends for finance professionals. So what tasks is AI good at? So I talk a lot to professionals. I always ask them, hey, what are you using AI for? And let me just spell out a few examples. We'll give these materials to you. I'm not going to read this slide to you. But the first one I'll mention is collation and summarization. Many of you might be familiar with this use case quite simply from going to a Teams chat, coming to a Zoom webinar like this. If you look in the actual participant list, you see there's an AI there taking notes. So with AI taking notes at many meetings, it's a great way to summarize the meeting, which used to take a long time to actually look at your notes and build a summary, no longer necessary. In addition, when there are earnings calls with companies and you get the transcript from FactSet or Bloomberg, not only can it summarize it very quickly for you, you can ask a question about that earnings call. You can ask a question about all 500 earnings calls of all 500 S&P 500 last quarter, if you like, with one query. There's a dramatic acceleration in the research workflow when it comes to looking at PDF documents. The second thing I've heard quite a lot about is what we call chatting with data. And so when you plug a lot of data in, let's say structured data such as pure factor returns, for instance, as a finance professional, it makes it much easier to do things like screening, much easier to do things like generating algorithmic trading algorithms, because you can see the relationships, you can check relationships much more quickly than on the structured platform solutions. So this is a very big use case, being able to chat with your data. So people just prefer natural language entry to using, let's say, a Bloomberg or FactSet for that matter. So that's a very big use case, what they call chatting with data. Another one is simply market research. So I was meeting with a portfolio manager last summer, or winter rather, down in South Africa. It was July 2025. And this, I'd say, late career professional actually asked the Stanford Storm platform, write me a report on the Chinese electric car industry. And within not too long, it wrote a 10-page report, beautifully structured with footnotes. And what she told me quite simply was this would have taken an intern 3 weeks to do. And she got it back in half an hour. And so there are these dramatic efficiencies, in particular to the research workflow. Another great example I heard is I spoke to an analyst who used to look at Domino's Pizza, which is a pizza company here in America. And one of the most important numbers that a pizza company can disclose is what the average selling price is doing through time and what they plan to do to the average selling price of a pizza. Okay, it's a really important input to your model. The problem is Domino's Pizza did not reveal that data consistently in the same place every quarter. They would put it in a news story. They would talk about it at their capital markets presentation. And it was a real needle in a haystack problem going to look for that piece of data from the company. But now you have a broad context window with AI. You can search simultaneously across all the disclosures of Domino's, news sources, filings, transcripts, and so on. And it's dramatically fast now to find that number. And so that's true. If you're looking at lots of companies in your portfolio, there are lots of numbers like that that are inconsistently disclosed. And the market research capability of things like Anthropic leads to a dramatic efficiency. Another one I mentioned, which is a really cool one, is basic content writing. So about analysts and what they do. Let's say they have a standard template, a one-pager, talking about how a certain company, say Caterpillar, the digger company, did in the last quarter. What they can then do is go to AI and say, you know what? I want a report that looks like this one-pager I did on Caterpillar, but change it to waste management or change it to Boeing. And then AI is very good at imitating what you did. And then it imitates your output. Essentially, it makes it much faster to generate one pages and in the same format with the same look and feel to one you've already developed. That's a dramatic efficiency because all of a sudden you can really pump out those one-page reports or tear sheets much more efficiently than you could before. So basic content writing, quite simply, when it knows your style, it's much better at doing that. I spoke to another portfolio manager in Singapore not too long ago, and he's in the style of Warren Buffett. His investing style is Warren Buffett, a value investor. And he asked the question, hey, what would Warren Buffett say about this company? Give me a one-pager in terms of what Warren Buffett would say about this investment prospect using his investment criteria. So the ability to imitate people, to imitate Howard Marks, the famous investors in the world, it's really good at that, AI. Okay, so what is AI not good at then, based on me talking to lots of people around the world? Well, the first thing to note is you've got to understand how AI is wired. They're large language models that use historic data. The problem is the investments business, when it comes to doing an investment thesis, is not about history, it's about the future. Sure, history can help you try to predict the future, but an investment thesis is purely about the future. The human brain is finely tuned to always be thinking about the future. LLMs are simply not. So there's a different wiring there. So the way LLMs work is they imitate the outputs of other humans. So let's say if they've seen lots of investment research notes, 35-page initiation notes, they can do a good job imitating them. But remember, the crux of an initiation note on a new company is all about the future. And so it's not particularly good because it's been trained just with historic data. So humans are much more finely tuned for that. And I will say one further thing, which is that when you look at the context window, what data has a model been trained with? You all heard the expression garbage in and garbage out. There's also another problem of hallucination, but I'm not going to touch upon that right now. But the most compelling data to use when you're generating an investment thesis is something that's new to you, fresh, proprietary, that nobody else has. So inherently, an LLM will not have access to that in its context window, but that's always the best input for an investment thesis, something original, something the market hasn't yet baked in. Let's say you've done your own survey about attitudinal preferences of consumers. Let's say you're looking at an investment in a fake meat company, Impossible Burger, for example. Well, a big input will be, what do consumers think about that, their latest range of products? Well, doing a survey is a great way to with that. That will not be on the internet. That will not be in the training set because you spent a lot of money generating that proprietary insight. You're not going to give it to LLM for their benefit. You're going to use it for your own benefit. So the reality is the context windows, the data these AIs are trained on, doesn't have much of the best stuff in it because no one's going to give it to them because it's really valuable stuff that's expensive to gather. So these are kind of some of the drawbacks of AI and why AI is not very good at the most important part of the job of a portfolio manager or analyst, which is generating an investment thesis. So there are some areas where it's very good. We heard from Brian about some repetitive activities where the cost of error actually is not too great. But when it comes to an investment thesis, when you place large bets to generate alpha, it's not there yet. Okay, so Brian mentioned, what about the CFA program then in all this? What's the role of humans who do the CFA charter, for instance? Well, let's talk about the role of humans in the new world that Brian has painted a great picture of how it works with agentic AI and so on. What do humans do in this whole ball of wax? So first thing to recognize, great quote here, computers are useless, they can only give you answers. This is a real quote. I'll be impressed if anybody knows the answer to this, who said this, but I'll tell you, think about it in your head, don't Google it. But interestingly, this quote came from 1968 in Spain. This was actually, by the way, artificial intelligence, the term was coined in 1956 at Dartmouth College, where I was at this weekend at my reunion, by the way. So AI was around in 1968, but no one was really talking about it. And certainly not this guy, Pablo Picasso, a surreal artist. But what a great quote. Computers are useless. They can only give you answers. So what did Pablo Picasso mean by this sensational statement, which actually has, I think, aged very well? What he meant was questions are much more interesting than answers. And it's really the domain of humans to be asking questions all the time. That's the job of a portfolio manager. It's specifically to be asking the right question at the right time. The investments business will reward you very greatly if you're asking the right question at the right time. But think about these prompts. Brian was showing the prompt screen. I showed you the Claude prompt screen. It's waiting for the human to ask a question. It's not actually asking questions itself. You can program it to ask questions, sure you can, but the domain of the domain of asking questions right now is primarily a human domain. So asking questions is a really key thing humans do. It's still their main role. That's why prompt windows are written, waiting for the question from the human. Okay, so I talk to a lot of people around the world. I mentioned this, and they always say, "Hey, I'm worried about, are there going to be no jobs because of AI? What do you want me to focus on? What do I focus on as a young person, given all these changes?" And we developed this new toolkit called the 8 C's. And we call it the 8 C's. It's easy to memorize, but they're 8 characteristics or qualities that we believe humans should focus on, that lean into, in order to future-proof their careers. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to bring out a couple of them. So first of all, communication, storytelling, the ability to tell stories. Humans respond very well to stories, and humans are very good at writing and telling stories. And so I say the dramatic arts is a great place to learn storytelling, by the way. My kids, my 10-year-old, 11-year-old, they love drama. I love the fact they love drama. I'm on stage right now. You're a dramatist when you're in business, quite simply. You're a dramatist when you're in finance. You have to tell very good stories. That's the only way to motivate humans to act. Curiosity, very important one. This is all about asking questions, okay? I mentioned the power of questions a bit earlier. So curiosity, it's kind of people who ask the question why 5 times in a row. And why is that? And why is that? And why is that? When you tug on a thread, it's very powerful if you keep asking the question why until you get a blank stare. And at that point, you're actually getting somewhere, because then you're going to new areas that someone hasn't actually thought of. And if you go there with a conversation, you're actually close to making, this is where innovation happens, when you actually get to the end of the road by asking the question why. Mathematics is a great tool to ask the question why, by the way, but curiosity, if you listen to all podcasts about what do CEOs look for in new recruits and people to promote, then if you do a word cloud of all the business podcasts out there, I'm pretty certain curiosity would rise up as one of the most used words when a CEO talks about the qualities they're looking for someone to take over from them as a successor or a high caliber business professional. Another really important thing in this day and age, your lives are all getting longer. I hope everyone has a long life on this webinar. And so the reality is you cannot just rely on your education from undergraduate or even master's program, quite frankly. You have to keep learning. So let me illustrate that. Remember from my slide, my resume earlier, I graduated in 1999 with a degree in law. So what happened after 1999? Well, a lot happened after 1999. I say 2 bodies of knowledge that really developed. One was climate change. You have to learn about climate technologies, green technologies. That really was not much of a thing in 1999. And of course, AI, quite simply. I remember when the cat identification trick came out on the Apple iPhone in 2012. Such a magic trick where you can, hey, look for all cats in my photo library on my iPhone, right? That was one of the earliest kind of consumer-facing, I'd say, manifestations of AI. So I had to learn about AI. They did not teach me about AI at University of Nottingham in the 1990s. It wasn't really a thing then, even though it was a thing bubbling under. So you have to be a continuous learner. You have no choice. You cannot just rest on your laurels based on, doesn't matter how impressive your degrees are, even if you have a PhD, there are going to be new bodies of knowledge that come along that you're going to have to learn. And I'll close out on critical thinking. So one thing that my dean told me over the weekend at Dartmouth College, the MBA school I went to, he talks about the power of skepticism. So being slightly disbelieving when people tell you anything, it's really powerful. Asking the question, why is that? And why do you think that? And the reason that's more powerful now since 2022 is hallucination. You have to be skeptical about the outputs you're getting from AI. And it really benefits you if you have foundational learning in order to corroborate or check or cross-reference the outputs of AI. People say, well, you've got to check the AI outputs. Humans will check AI outputs. Well, the question is, how are they going to check AI outputs? The only way you can check AI outputs are if you have professional experience and if you have foundational knowledge, quite simply. That's the reason why the CFA Charter is more important now. There's a consensus emerging. It's actually more powerful, the CFA Charter now, than before 2022. This is one of the many reasons. Okay, let's talk. I'll end very briefly on this CFA program. So I love this quote. I was actually with Brian, I think 2 weeks ago, Brian, I think we were in Eastern Europe together in Bulgaria. And for the first time, I said the following to a group of young people, that essentially we live in an attention deficit world. Attention spans are getting shorter. Kids are doom scrolling on their iPhones and Androids. You've got brain rot on YouTube. And the ability to prove that you've read 9,000 pages and mastered the content proves that your brain has not been destroyed by TikTok, basically. And that did get a lot of laughs in the room in Bulgaria with 450 people because it's really sinking in. So when you think about it, if you have a secure exam with a pass rate like this across all 3 levels and you cannot cheat on the exam and you have to read those books in order to pass the exam, it proves that you have the ability to pay sustained focus and attention to written materials. And that's getting more and more rare in this day and age, meaning the value of that charter goes up. The reason people do the CFA program is something called signal value, which is essentially signaling that you're able to make the sacrifice, that you've mastered that stack of books I just showed and you mastered the content. And the only way to do that is through sustained focus over 900 hours. The value of that is going up in the AI age. So that's really the emerging views on the CFA program. Of course, I would say that I represent the CFA program, but actually I'm hearing more and more now in the field, not just things like the CFA program, other credentials, master's programs, of values going up because people are looking for people who can check work, People are looking for people who are critical thinkers, who can think for themselves and challenge the outputs of AI. So that value is going up. So I really feel strongly that that it's important to invest in yourself. Don't just rely on AI. There's more research coming out now. It's quite dangerous to do that, actually. Don't outsource your critical thinking to AI. So invest in yourself, and you can use AI as a really powerful tool, as Brian showed. But do not be tempted by shortcuts. Do not stop critical thinking yourself. And on that note, I think it's a good note to end on. I will hand back to you, Charles, for a discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rob. Brian as well. Very informative content. And honestly, for myself, I'm not a finance professional myself, and I was really intrigued all through this. Brian, I think we have a question for you in particular that emerged in the chat. Someone is asking, how do AI systems that use predictive AI and deep learning compare to LLMs?
Yeah. Well, I think we need to be clear that a large language model is a predictive deep learning architecture. It's just trained off of text to do prediction of the next word, the next token, which are subwords. That gives it a very large advantage because much of our information is baked into text, and so it can do some very accurate prediction, and it was done in a unsupervised manner. So it was a semi-supervised manner where essentially there wasn't any specific labeled data. It was just trying to predict the next word, and it just got really, really, really good at predicting the next word. Now, there's other predictive models, so you could actually use a transformer architecture, which is what the LLMs are based off of, for time series data. There's been a lot of people that, of course, after the popularity of ChatGPT, had tried to use the transformers architecture using the attention mechanisms, which is what underlies the architecture, to predict autoregressive, predict returns, next day returns, or any time series. It was a mixed bag, of course, and a lot of people came back with just a traditional autoregressive, conditional heteroscedasticity model was better. But I think that there is a difference between just taking pure price data and trying to use that to do predictions of the next day versus taking training of transformers architecture that takes in, say, a ton and ton of economic data or all the data that could potentially be used to make a prediction. I think the bag is still out on that, but it's still very, very kind of early. And I think that if somebody did find some alpha from using the Transformers architecture, they would probably keep it pretty secret.
Cool. All right. And coincidentally, Rob, I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned quite close to the end there when you said that maybe the CFA program would also help a lot with the foundational knowledge necessary to best use AI. And we just got a pop-up in the chat, someone asking how specifically the CFA is integrating AI skills in the curriculum.
Well, I think it's first of all important to talk about that foundation quite simply. You have to have the foundation, or I think AI skills are less useful without that. So we have put AI into the curriculum starting in 2018. So we started talking about what used to be called machine learning techniques, things like principal component analysis, eigenvectors, eigenvalues, and so on. So we put things like that, bag of words, sentiment analysis, which actually have now been subsumed by LLM is now a more modern way to do that. But so we put those mathematical techniques in. We talked about regression being the foundation of it, as Brian mentioned. The word guessing game is fundamentally based on regression. So you have to know regression, you have to know matrix multiplication, and so on. So we started putting that in. We beefed that up. We now have big data projects in the curriculum as well. And what we're doing now is we're going to pepper in actual use cases. So you heard me talk about some of the use cases a bit earlier. There are other tricks I didn't mention, like uploading your portfolio into an AI and asking what risks your portfolio is exposed to. We plan to put that into the topic 10, wealth management, portfolio management, just to illustrate the sorts of things that investors are doing in their workflow, how they're leveraging AI. Another great one would be in the equities domain. We're going to put in an example where someone's about to publish an initiation note, and they feed it into AI, Claude Pro or whatever. It says, give me the 10 hardest questions that a portfolio manager might ask me when I try to sell him or her to buy or sell this security. So we're going to illustrate concrete use cases throughout the curriculum. And we're also planning to do a practical skills module where you need to leverage AI, and that will be a level 3 practical skills module. This is all coming.
Very, very interesting stuff. And more on that as well. I mean, there's a question here I would like to somewhat answer, but please, either of you guys can feel free to pitch in with more. Someone's asking if the CFA Institute's AI program is only relevant to financial market, or if it's also applicable in other finance fields or applicable to non-financial corporates. From my personal modest knowledge, I would say that the not specifically the AI part of the CFA program, but the CFA program would definitely cover all aspects of financial analysis, financial markets, investment decisions, etc. And the AI will be mostly relevant to where it would be mainly most useful, I would say. And if I'm going to be building a little bit on your last answer on that, Rob, would it be accurate to say that AI would be most beneficial, as you mentioned earlier as well with the foundational knowledge point, if we know what to ask out of it? So as you mentioned, that I would ask it to provide me maybe with the 10 most common questions someone would ask me about my portfolio or whatever it is. So if we know how to prompt the AI, we know what data to get out of it, it would be most beneficial for us. But just placing amounts of data on the AI would probably not be useful, as Brian also mentioned earlier with the hallucinations as well. So just dumping data on AI and expecting something in return might be more useless than useful.
I think it helps if you. What I've seen is that it's ironic and kind of sad in a way, but the people getting the most benefit out of AI, that when I talk in the field to a lot of people, is people my age with hair the same color as mine. And I think the reason for that is that they know what they're doing, and they know sort of the workflow and how to generate alpha, essentially. And so it really benefits you greatly if you already know the workflow manually before you actually use AI to accelerate it. I'm sure Brian has perspectives on that as well.
Sorry, actually, can you repeat the question? I was trying to read this
Yeah.
question.
So essentially, who gets benefit from AI? And I was commenting that actually senior professionals get more benefit because they know the workflow. They already know what to ask, and so they know where they're going to get really good leverage out of these toolkits.
Yeah, there's actually some really interesting research, and I can't remember who put it out right now, but they found that the gap that very junior people had gotten a significant jump from an augmented workflow, and very senior people had gotten a significant jump from an augmented workflow, but the middle people didn't get as much of a jump. So essentially, the very juniors don't necessarily know much at all, so they can get a jump in their capability with that augmentation. And then the very seniors know those questions, as like you said, and they can get the jump in capability as well. But the people in the middle are not, they don't have quite the questions to ask to really beef up their capabilities.
It's actually, Charles, what I see is banks around the world are building prompt libraries. So essentially, they're going to their staff saying, "Hey, how are you using AI in your workflow?" And they're building repositories that then they use to train other staff. And I think that's trying to address that middle point that I think Brian mentioned. But I do see firms doing that now to do internal training.
Yeah, I mean, we do find a lot of AI resources online and AI courses here and there, and most of them are about prompting. But Then again, yes, if I'm a finance professional, there are specific wordings or types of prompts I need to put in to get the best outcome. If I'm in marketing, if I'm in human resources, I would prompt the AI differently. So, like one generalized course about how to prompt AI won't really help someone in a very specific function, unless, as you mentioned, they do have a solid background and foundational knowledge.
Yeah, I'm gonna very much agree to that. I'm actually one of the proponents of that. I think that prompting is overrated. I think it has a lot, it has so much more to do with your domain expertise. If you are a domain expert and you can talk about things in detail, you know the types of models, the specificity of that model, and you can talk about that. That's going to give you such a much bigger leg up versus somebody who doesn't. And it has everything to do with your domain expertise. I mean, they'll be able to train a model to create really great prompts, and they've already essentially done that. But it will be those that can differentiate those prompts with domain expertise that have that alpha advantage.
Make it more relevant to their exact specific function, maybe.
Yeah, and as Rob was mentioning about prompts, I mean, just imagine these skills. I mean, you can collaborate on these skills throughout the organization, but also, the industry could potentially collaborate. Obviously, if it's very proprietary information, they won't be doing that in an open source environment. But, we think about skills as like, say, like everything you ever learned in the CFA program. As you're learning it, you knew it, and then you write it down in a note. Well, that note is persistent. That stays there forever. And so it doesn't forget. So it's additive. It's essentially a monotonic function of knowledge. So you just have to keep building up those master prompts and those skills
I
to
love
get
that.
more capable.
Love that. Thank you for that, Brian. So, if with that, Yane, I don't want to keep you guys for much too long, but there's an interesting question here as well in the chat because it's relevant to the current circumstances, especially in the GCC and MENA region. Provided that LLM relies on historical data to extrapolate future results, how does AI, particularly in the finance and investment fields, process current data during a regime change, such as the period we are passing through, that is exhibiting heteroscedasticity in the data set?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that they are based off of historical information. So no matter what they're going, if the exact same thing, and I would say it's not even just the exact same thing, but if you threw the same words in to the prompt, then it will definitely ground on those types of words. If just mention that we're headed into stagflationary period or something like that, then it will use all of its prior knowledge to project that going forward. But there is, of course, the nuance that you can add within your prompt that can potentially give it more of an accurate picture, and that's really where this is actually really where I think the advantage of the large language models versus just predictive black boxes come, is that we use text data as context to determine the next that prediction going forward. And the text data is usually something that hasn't happened exactly, but if you can describe the pieces that are different, it might be able to predict um, better, but not perfect. I mean, it's these
To a
again,
certain extent of accuracy, maybe, if
certain
we may
extent,
say so.
exactly.
Which brings us back to what Rob mentioned earlier, that these outputs from AI, they need to be audited. And the best way to properly audit the output is for you to have the necessary foundational knowledge, right?
Exactly, and ask the right questions, as Rob said.
All right, all right. So thank you so much, Rob, Brian. Much appreciated the time, the effort. We always cherish our partnership with the CFA Institute and the insights you guys have to offer. I would say personally, it was an enriching experience for myself. If you have any last words, this is the best time to put it. And then I'm just gonna thank everybody and close up shop.
No, I learned a lot here today. I really enjoyed it. So thanks Charles for putting this together. It's really great to be here today and speak with you all and get these great questions.
Yeah, same. Very much appreciated. And thank you, Rob. I also learned a good amount.
Amazing, amazing, guys. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone who was with us. We hope that you actually did walk away with what we intended you to be walking away with after this. Again, anybody has any additional questions, you will always be able to refer back to our local offices across the region. Morgan International, our program advisors, would be more than happy to orient you in the right direction. If you're looking for specific AI related contents, we will help you go there. If you want more foundational and investment knowledge, whether it's the CFA charter itself, financial risk management, advanced financial modeling, any other types of foundational knowledge that you need in the finance field, we'd be more than happy to actually cater to it. Just reminding everyone that you will be provided access to the recording of this session, so you may review it as well, go over some of the top points that you were more interested about, and we will definitely be reaching out to you shortly after for some more feedback. And thank you for everyone who took the time to answer the poll. We appreciate it a lot, and hope to see everybody again very soon.